Okay, here I go. Sorry it took me so long to get started. This was a video, still black film, was a video about about men that are trans who talk about life and family. His passion was to live the way he wanted. He talked about when he was a female and how he hated to getting up at the crack of dawn to get dressed. He identified as lesbian at that time. He said that he looked like a drag queen, a bad drag queen. He was treated bad at work because of how he looked. He stated that he wanted to learn about the change he called making being in trans group. He loved going to the conferences for trans people and connecting with like people. He was an activist for the LGBT community, looking at the man youth would not think that he was once a woman. He being a trans as a black man is not easy. He states that race plays a big part in how one is treated as a transsexual. He faced inequalities in getting a job. It was very hard because he was a trans person. He states that it is very hard. The next trans person was talking about how he felt as a female and that he could not live as a female any longer. Childhood was hard. He does have terrible cerebral palsy, so he spent a lot of time in the hospital. He believes that being a black man was easier than being a female, although people feel scared because he is a black man. He doesn't understand how hard it is to be a black man. It is to be a black man in America. He states that black men are labeled as as being athletes or as criminals, and that it's not in no in between, which is biased because he doesn't fall into neither category. He talked about having breasts and how they had to be removed because he also had to be removed because he couldn't stand the fact that he had breasts and he felt as though he was a man. He also states that he fell in love with a woman. His sexuality changed and he biased only being with men. He states that because he was gay, he got tattoos because that is what guys do. And he got ear piercings and he loves it. Can't go without them. And for him, that's a man thing. The next trans man still no name to tell until the end where I didn't get the names. I didn't write them down. I apologize for that. Talks about the meeting at the church where he met his girlfriend. His name was Caroline when he was a woman. He talks about the death of his mother. He talks about having kids. He has a wife and how the relationship was stretched due to the complications from her pregnancy. They got the eggs from him and put them in his wife, and the wife had the kids. He believes in his wife being an equal to him as far as where she stands in his life and in their relationship. He states that he sees himself as an activist and that he wants to teach black men to be positive about life and how they function in the world. The next man or trans man talks about how he had trouble with identifying who he was. He talks about living and dying when he was coming to the terms with his identity. He was a rapper and loved hip hop. He talks poetry to express how he feels about the world around him. He states that he is a writer. He had issues with his body, but he realized that he loved a girl, states that he woke up one day and said that he was trans. He called himself Jay Nichols. James was not a name that a girl was, so he chose a name he could that could be unisex. He states that his dad was his biggest support, his mom not so much, because he was changing into a man, and he was her youngest and her girl. He also talks about being around coworkers and how they think about his man, the man that was once a woman. Lewis, the next trans man, talks about his coming of age and knowing that he was not woman, he was man, and the change was going to happen. He states it was hard at first because he watched his body change and he was a little scared of how his wife was by his side and how he didn't know how she would react to his transitioning to being a man. His wife is a lesbian and identifies as such. I think that's weird because to be a lesbian, you like women. So why is she with a trans man? Is it the is it the something because he was once a woman? I think that it is very confusing deciphering trans women and trans man. I guess I don't really understand it. Lewis realizes that he is who he is and that he is getting used to his body and that giving his body a chance to be what he wanted is important. The physical and the mental ideas of self acceptance is very important. He states that family is dragged alongside of them when they go through the change. He say being rejected is the most important aspect of going into the change and being the change. The next speaker talks about not being family and that he hadn't been family in years. In 2002, he realized who he was and that he was a and his transition began. He wanted to be home so that he could have them for support, his family. They made it okay to go ahead with the change into being a woman. His sister took the change hard and cried a lot in the beginning of his change because he was her sister. He also states that he didn't allow the kids to call him auntie. He was uncle. He states that he was never into girl stuff and his mother respected who he was. His mentor was his brother who died in 2003, taught him the hard parts of being a man. He liked to date women that reminded him of his mother and his sister. He went through who he wanted to date: straight women, trans guys, or lesbian women. He transitioned and he dated men, all kind. He also knew he couldn't settle down with a man. He married a woman. In the book, The Man Not, in the book, The Man Not, pages 73 to 103, Lost in the Kiss, has a black man in the prison telling the story. He is telling the story. He is a rapist. He is a homosexual. Two, he is a writer that is uneducated. His name is Eldridge Cleaver. He was once. He was a tall, big man that stood over 6 feet tall. He wrote a book that was an unpublished manuscript, as a which reads as a survey of his time in prison. It was during the 1950s. He talked about little Jesus. He talks about his problems. I think that little Jesus was someone manifested in Cleaver's head to help him cope with the situation. I am kind of confused with the reading of this book because I am not a silent reader. I am read to due to my disability, but I am trying to make sense of it. I did read that the civil rights movement had other agendas for black men to have free access to white women, and that the buck was what white men called black men in the 1950s and 60s. And that's why black men were getting hung back in the day to try to keep the white women pure and safe from them. I also read that the black men were raped by white men and women, and that this was the context of Cleaver's rage. It's sad that in this day, rape of a black man and boys is still happening. The next book that I read was Rethinking Rufus. This chapter talks about enslaved men sexually exploited by white masters and overseers. Reading this chapter gave me knowledge because I never thought being the sexual aspect of slavery to men was rape. I guess because I only see the sexual exploitation of women in slave narrative movies. The book states that there was affection between slaves, and I would hope so because of the trauma that they endured. It also states that white men came after the enslaved men were loving each other. I guess the difference is they took their love and made them perform, whereas the enslaved men were intimate with their fellow enslaved men, although some of the sexual violence also came from enslaved men. White men fetishized objectification of black men's bodies on page 95, where there's a picture deploying the erotic objectifications of black men. One black man from Boston named Wilson was a model for the white man to paint their depiction and narrative of black men and how black men's bodies are unique. The book goes on to say that Wilson's body illustrates the border culture's objectification of black men. What does this say about Rufus? That what he did to Rose was a violation to her. It was sure a violation to him to be told to mate with someone you're not attracted to. The last book I read was Solutions for Black Misandry, Misandry, Flat Blackness, and Black Male Death. What is black masculinism? According to the book, its intellectual and political movement and an analytical research tool. For black men in the second section, it talks about the black masculinist turn. It is where black men exchange ideas and reflection on black male lives according to the book. It is weird that the book mentions Oprah Winfrey as being a feminist. I'm also taking a women's studies class, and now that I read this, I see it, especially in the color purple. The book also talks about the micro and the macro turn turns of the black man. The macro aspect of his turn is small scale events such as media production and public events. The macro turns are basis for ideas of turns according to the readings in the book. Well, I have read a lot and look forward to our next session. Have a good day and bye for now.